The Cooler Master NR200. Big features, small size. And I feel like that's an understatement. This case surprised me in so many ways because Cooler Master in the past has been quite disappointing, but with the NR200 and the NR200P, I feel like nothing is really missing and they've really nailed the design, the price point, the feature set. With this case, they put out some serious competition versus the N-Case M1, for example, and the entire experience here has been almost flawless. I put on my regular ITX machine in there with the RTX 2060 Super and SFX power supply and my 9600K. I'm using the new Galahad all-in-one coolers from Lee & Lee, the 240 ones that I can mount on the side. The NR200 is not exactly compact for an ITX space. It's still 18 liters. It's still bigger than my Corsair 1, and it's about a third of the size of your regular mid-tower. So if you've been looking for an ITX experience but didn't exactly want to gravitate towards something that is $200 plus, the NR200 is for you because the price point is absolutely a banger. You're looking at $79 for the NR200 and $99 for the NR200P. I will outline the differences later, but should this be your next ITX compact enclosure? Let's find out right after this. The Razer Viper Ultimate, the lightest and fastest wireless mouse designed for esports with an accurate Focus Plus 20K DPI optical sensor, Razer Hyperspeed wireless technology that is 25% faster than the competition, all packed into a lightweight body with optical mouse switches. Check it out below. So first, let's dive into the build quality, and I'm happy that for $79, Cooler Master did not cut any corners. So we do have an entirely steel body, no aluminum here, but that would skyrocket the price anyway. I have the white model here, and the only color accent are the feet, which are gray. They are removable, and Cooler Master provides 3D printing templates, so you can 3D print your own and replace the stock feet. I find it really cool. And we also have a plastic top panel, which is also gray, trying to mix things up so it's not a boring white enclosure. The I/O is up top here with the Cooler Master power reset switches, 2 USB 3 ports, and your combo audio jack. All of the panels are toolless, and we have this dual peg system where one of the sides on the side panel kind of sits inside the frame, and the side panels can actually just hang off the little ledge there, while the opposite side has dual pegs, making installation super easy. The only thing they cheaped out on are all the dust filters, which are magnetic, and they basically cover the entire case, so top, both sides, and the bottom too, but they're generic and not the high density, high performance mesh type. Now the interior is super interesting because we have a variety of configurations available. This case supports really long graphics cards, CPUs up to 155mm, a 280mm radiator on the side or a 240 at the bottom. As for exact storage locations, we have 2 SSD mounts behind the front panel. Then you can mount either an SSD or a hard drive on top of the power supply cage, and also mount a hard drive on this side radiator bracket, which by the way can support dual 120s or 140mm fans with their respective radiators. And finally, SFX or SFX-L power supplies are supported. The one odd thing that popped into my mind was that 155mm CPU tower clearance, because on their website you can clearly see they're using the Hyper 212 Evo, which is around 158mm. So I decided to try my own, mounted that on my motherboard, and put that inside the enclosure. And yes, it does fit, no problems with the side panel closing. The tempered glass panel closes just fine as well. And the only thing here is that you cannot install the side fan radiator bracket if your CPU tower clearance is higher than 155mm. So they should put a massive asterisk there to clarify what this 155mm is really about, and that in fact you can mount up to 158 to 159mm CPU towers in here. For GPUs, we have triple horizontal PCI slots, which is fantastic for massive oversized graphics cards that will just fit into that bottom chamber. But we also have the dual vertical PCI slots, which expands your configuration potential. That's really the only advantage of getting the N200P, because not only do you get the tempered glass side panel and the second 120mm top exhaust fan, because the regular N200 just comes with a single top exhaust. And by the way, they both come with a 92mm fan that you can mount at the back in case you're not using the vertical PCI slots. But that's really where the N200P shines, because we have a very short riser cable included that you can use when you go with a vertical GPU. Really, the advantage here with the vertical GPU mount is the opening up of all that space at the bottom for a really thick radiator with fans. This also gives you an opportunity to hide all your cable mess because the graphics card, depending on its length, will cover both the motherboard and the power supply, and the exiting cables from the power supply will not interfere or bump into the GPU as you would with if your graphics card is just mounted directly into the motherboard. And that brings us to the power supply mount, and there are plenty. So not only do we have a little height adjustment for either SFX or SFXL mount, but you can also reposition the entire power supply bracket to the front of the enclosure. And this opens up a little bit more area beside the motherboard if you wish, but it does block the front of that side radiator mount. The one conflicting part about the N200P, however, is that the tempered glass side panel doesn't really complement the vertical GPU mount. Not only will you choke the GPU, but also you're removing any potential for additional airflow because the side radiator bracket, I mean, there's no point of installing it if you have a tempered glass side panel. So the most ideal configuration would be the N200 without the P. The one really cool thing about the top panel and the included fan or fans, depending on which case you get, is that not only do we have a guard there, so no cables will be eaten by those blades, but the actual mount is also toolless, so you can simply push them into the rubber pegs and they stay securely in place. So the full airflow potential here is actually pretty decent. 2 fans up top, 2 on the side, 2 the bottom, and 1 for the rear. Just keep in mind that this is an ITX system after all, so if you are trying to max out all the fan slots, get a fan controller or many splitters. Now, a few things to keep in mind. If you're in the SFXL position for the power supply, it will block the top front fan from having clearance because it does interfere with that power cable. And while I appreciate the inclusion of these Velcro straps all around the power supply cage, you do have to spend some time making sure to clean them up and so they don't exit and bump into your graphics card, which is why I had to raise my SFX power supply into the SFXL position. Granted, I am using thicker braided cables, so when they do exit, they cover quite a bit of area. But routing everything else was super simple. I appreciate the bundled front I/O cables, so they stay in their housing, so you don't have to plug them individually for power reset and all that stuff. And also the USB 3 cable is purple. All right. Finally, when the system was assembled, fortunately, I wasn't frustrated dealing with all the cables because the case is fairly large. You can get to the places, and because the radiator is on the bracket, you can simply remove it, do all your cables, and put it back in place. Just make sure that no cables are touching the fan blades. I'm really excited to use this for my future small downsized desktop PC that isn't for gaming, but for work only. I was gonna use the NZXT H1 because of its towering form factor and really good CPU temperature, but the cooling on this thing is incredible. At stock configuration, you can see both CPU and GPU are completely under control. Removing all the side panels, you can see the barrier for airflow isn't that significant, which is great. I am only using the one top exhaust fan like you would find on the NR200, but removing it does increase our GPU temperature quite significantly. I then added the fan at the bottom as intake to help with GPU cooling, but that actually didn't do anything. And then putting that to exhaust, that was a big mistake. As you can see, the GPU temperature really just maxed out there for me. And the last thing I did was remove the side dust filter where the radiator is exhausting air, and you can see our CPU temperature improved by 2 degrees and we dropped 1 degree on the GPU. This means we have a lot of cooling potential inside this enclosure, which is fantastic. A 240 or even a 280 mil for the CPU should be plenty, and the GPU has a lot of breathing room. Now, when I compare this torture test with the NZXT H1, which has a 140 mil all-in-one cooler, it does run hotter on the CPU, that's understandable, but look at that GPU temperature. The side ventilation is just not enough. While the Era ITX from Fractal Design is an embarrassment, it's just a hot box here. So performance-wise, the NR200 with the included 120 mil fan for the top is absolutely enough, and you don't need additional fans in there. And so out of the box cooling is phenomenal. I would say this case is large enough and comfortable enough to do custom loops. And really the only thing that I would say is kind of a concern for me of having this case on my desk is the airflow, because it's exhausting everything from the side, which means that if it's on my right side, I can feel all that air coming in, which is why it's facing the other way right now. Maybe in winter when things are at load, it's gonna be a nice little heater, but something to keep in mind still. Cooler Master has redeemed themselves in the ITX space, and we haven't given out an award in a while, but the NR200 deserves the Hardware Canucks Damn Good and Damn Good Value awards. If you're into the ITX direction and you find this, pick one up. Alright guys, I'm Dmitry, check out this other relevant content, subscribe for more. I'll talk to you in the next video.